You are watching the Jennylyn Show, and I'm Jennylyn Gleave, your host. And as usual, I have found us another fascinating guest. And I cannot wait to begin the interview, because what he's been doing, I'm sure, will fascinate you as much as it has fascinated me. Michael Mercury, thank you so much for coming on the Jennylyn Show.
My pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you.
Well, of course. You've been all around the world and done all sorts of stuff. Why don't we start with that?
Well, I've been very fortunate. Normally, I'm the one interviewing people. I've been doing television and radio over the years for, ever since I can remember. But I started out actually as a TV producer, and prior to that, I was actually a stage actor. And then I went into radio. But it really gets back to where I was born. I was born in Tokyo, Japan. And
you were?
Yes.
Wow.
And I actually had dual citizenship till I was 18. And then during the Vietnam War, I had to swear allegiance to the United States between Japanese and the United States. That's what they asked me to do. And so
yes.
I take my citizenship actually a little bit more serious than I think if you were born in the United States. You just kind of take it for granted. But when I actually had to put my hand up and swear to protect the Constitution and the government, so to speak, it was a meaningful moment, because my father was a lieutenant colonel in counterintelligence. And that's why we were in Japan, because he had worked under General MacArthur at that time after World War II. And so my citizenship is important to me, and it afforded me an incredible life. By the time I finished high school, I'd been in 11 schools, actual academic schools.
Wow, around the world?
My father traveled extensively because he had a specialty. And we lived in Germany for 3 years. I grew up in Puerto Rico. I spent some time in Montreal, a year in Montreal, but I was studying school at that time. We were in Texas, Georgia, Florida, New Mexico, and subsequently after that I lived in Iran for a year, which was probably one of the most amazing experiences of my life.
Fascinating.
I loved Iran, by the way. It was it is a great country.
So you also worked at the BBC.
I did, actually, when I was in Davis. I used to produce the football games for UC Davis some years ago under Coach Soker and then Bob Foster. And at that time, Davis was a real powerhouse in Division D football. And they were like one of the best football teams for like 20 years. They won all the time. And so I put them on television all over the state of California for about, I think it was 4 or 5 years. We did 23 games. And that really launched my television producing career. And then I had an opportunity to work with a program called One-on-One, which in the BBC at that time was being, they were doing an anniversary show, and the announcer actually was a professor at UC Davis. So we worked with them, with the BBC, doing a retrospective of his program. And then when I was in Switzerland, I produced a program called, it was called Small Change, kind of like the 60 Minutes of Swiss television. And we did a special program about garbage, waste removal, solar panels, and garbage dumps.
How long ago was that?
This was back, early 90s, late 80s, and this is what I found very strange. This was a program that was the highest rated show in Switzerland because they love to talk about garbage, they love to talk about solar panels, and they're really into recycling because they're a landlocked country, so they have to take care of their garbage. They can't just put it in dumps, and so they started putting it in burners and recycling the garbage to run their electricity. And that's what they do in Switzerland.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is.
So, since you've lived all around the world practically, how many languages do you speak?
Unfortunately, I can barely speak English. My mother spoke Spanish, but when you're traveling that much and you're in that many schools, I mean, there were times I was out of school for 2 or 3 months at a time. And so I always had to go to summer school every year ever since I graduated from high school. I went to summer school every year.
So does this mean you speak Japanese or some other language better than you speak English?
Not at all. But my mother spoke Spanish fluently. My father didn't speak Spanish, so we spoke English in the house, basically.
So the answer to the question is?
What?
How many languages do you speak?
None. Barely English, okay?
Oh,
just
really?
The one.
That's
just
what you
one.
mean when you say, I thought you meant you can speak these other languages so well you can hardly speak English.
Well, some would even question, well, I speak English, so.
So how did you survive in Japan then?
Well, fortunately, it was, I only stayed there like 9 months, which is ironic. So, but the Japanese, when you're born, they consider you 1 year old the day you're born, which is kind of interesting. That was 9 months, and then we moved to Carmel, and I was there for about 6 months, and then we moved to Puerto Rico, and then we moved to Dallas, Texas, and then Germany, and then just from there I kept moving around the country and went to a military academy for 3 years in Georgia when I was about 13, 14 years old.
So as a child, how did that affect your development?
I loved it, personally.
You
I loved it. Can you imagine, I'm 9 years old and I'm on a ship that took 2 weeks from New York to Bremerhaven, Germany, and to be 9 years old on the deck of a ship in the middle of the ocean. And quite honestly, that's when I first came in love with the stars, because at night, if you're on a boat in a ship and you have 1,000 miles on both sides of you, and at night, when you look up at the stars, it was almost like you could reach up and grab the stars. It was so magnificent. I mean, if you ever get a chance to see the sky on a ship in the middle of the ocean, it's an extraordinary event. It really is. And I think that's when I fell in love with the planets and eventually, subsequently, became an astrologer.
But as a child on a ship, didn't you miss like having other children?
Oh, God, no, there were other children on the boat, and we had a lot of fun. And
you.
I was a kind of precocious kid, so I used to sneak out of the room and at night at like 1 o'clock in the morning when everybody was asleep. And you know, it was kind of, when I think back, it was kind of really scary, because if I fell overboard, forget about it. You know, that was the end of the story. But it was an amazing experience. And as a child, everything was like, I was in a state of awe. And to go to Germany when you're 9 years old, I didn't even know what Germany was. And then to see this different culture, and then France and New England, or England, and just the places we traveled, it was amazing. It was an amazing place to grow up as a child.
Well, you've had such an interesting life that we're going to have to do more than one TV show, because I don't want to stray away from topic.
Yes, yes.
And the topic tonight is you suffered with the bipolar disorder.
Yes.
And you cured yourself. The person who recommended you to me and said you should come on the show to share this, told me he remembers you being in and out of the hospital.
Yes.
For really long periods.
Yes.
And then on all sorts of medications.
Well, that's where it gets a little funny for me, in a sense. That when I was 20 years old, I went to the National Theatre School of Canada in Montreal. So I have a master's degree in theatre. But prior to the master's degree, I got a scholarship to go to Montreal and at the National Theatre School. And that was an experience that was amazing to me. I was so thrilled to be there. At that time, it was considered one of the top acting schools in the world. And for me to have gotten a scholarship, and they only took 15 students out of an application of 3,500.
Yeah.
So for that to have happened, I was so thrilled to be there. And it was just like going to a magical land. Montreal is such a beautiful city. And the first thing I remember, we had dance class. We would take ballet, and there was karate and judo and yoga, breathing exercises. And this one day, it was 60 below zero, okay, in Montreal with the wind blowing, chill factor. And they had steamers in those days and we were on the top floor, and it was so hot in the room. They opened up the windows, and we were dancing, and there's sparks literally coming off our hands and in the air because of the heat from the room and the cold wind coming into the room. Literally sparks were happening in this room. And I'm not sure if this is related, but it was probably a month after that I started finding myself one day, all I can say is I ended up with a quiet mind. And I found my body doing something that I just wasn't really sure what was happening.
Are you serious?
Well, it was like being an automaton in a way, that there was no thoughts, but all of a sudden my body was driving this vehicle that I had, and I found myself just driving out into the countryside. And I just found myself parking the car, and I found myself walking into the woods, and I found myself just looking at nature without any thoughts, without any understanding of what I was doing, but it was the right thing for me to be doing.
So wait, prior to this time when you had this experience, you were having difficulty quieting your mind.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I was an actor, and so as an actor, you do a lot of memorization.
Right, I was an actress, I know.
So memorizing scripts was really a part of what I did, and so you were always thinking and remembering things. But this just happened to me out of the blue. I didn't expect this to happen to me. And then I have to say that I don't remember too much, but the next thing I remember, I was in a hospital. So evidently I was missing, and somehow they found me. And I can't really even relate to how that happened. But I found myself in a hospital, and eventually I think they called my mother, and she flew out to Montreal. And they gave me, at that time, in those days they called it Manic Depression. And most people in those days that had the kind of experiences I were having at that time tended to be very depressed. My problem is I subsequently had more experiences, but I tended to be euphoric. I was always happy. I was like in awe of life itself. I would not sleep for 3 or 4 days. I mean, I'm telling you, I had over 19 episodes over a period of 9 years.
Episodes as in not knowing
ending up in hospitals, being arrested, because I called it, they used to arrest me for disturbing the peace. And I used to call it disturbing the chaos.
Okay.
Because I saw the world as functionally insane. It was, I would say, the closest I could describe to what I went through is I saw the universe, I saw the world as it is, not as I wished it to be or as I thought it was. I was a person like most kids. I grew up, my mother took me to Catholic school. She put me in a Catholic school. And I remember at the age of 9, I was in the 2nd grade. And I was in catechism, and I raised my hand, and I asked the nun, "Are there horses and rabbits in heaven?" And she said, "No, there aren't." And I thought to myself, okay. I went home that day. I told my mother, I'm not going back to that school. I'm leaving the church because rabbits and horses are not allowed in heaven. My parents took me out of school, and next week I was in a different school.
Do you remember how old you were?
9 years old. Yep. And I think that relates to what happened to me later on, because I started to recognize the things that I was being taught, the things that I was being told, I was starting to be suspicious of. And I think what has happened to me over the years is I recognize we're born into a form of culture that's a form of conditioning, it's a form of patterns, habitual. We talk about addictions. We never talk about our cultural addictions, our psychological addictions. And I think what happened with me, and anybody who is bipolar, and that's what they call it now, it used to be manic depression. Bipolar people, for the most part, are extremely intelligent, they're extremely creative, and they find it hard to deal with the mundaneness of the world.
I just had this conversation on Sunday with a friend.
And
it's true.
Very much so.
And it's frustrating because your feelings are yours and they're real.
Very real. And one thing I've learned in my life is I came to a point in my life not that long ago, some years ago, over 10 years ago, where I woke up, what I would say I woke up. And what I woke up to is what I kind of experienced with my bipolar experiences. But the thing was, when I was in my 20s, I had no control over my awareness. My awareness was more horrified with the way the world was, and I realized this was not acceptable to me. I was having a real problem dealing with the world because I realized, to me, it was functionally insane. To this day, I still will say that. I think the world is functionally insane. And I just didn't accept it, and I had to listen to my inner voice and to my heart. And so to get to your question about drugs, and this is what happened. When they would start giving me lithium, which I just, the horrible drug, I felt like I was in a straitjacket. And when you're as creative and imaginative as I was, I hated feeling that way. And I said, this is unacceptable to myself. So what I started to do, I didn't take the medication.
Threw it away?
No. What I learned to do was, because they were always blood testing me. I'm a very precocious person. So what I did is I wouldn't take it, and then I knew the blood test was coming. 2 days before the blood test, I would take the drug, so they would always show up that I was taking the medication. But then after that, I wouldn't take the medication. And so that's how I fooled them to think I was taking the medication.
And what was the difference between when you took it and when you didn't take it that you were aware of?
Like I said, lithium at that time, and again, the drugs have changed over the years, but it put me in a straitjacket. I mean, I really felt like I was a robot, that I couldn't talk. I was kind of like in a I can't even say the word, state of kind of not being able to do much of anything, catatonic. And I just hated it. So that's why I stopped taking the drugs. And then I realized that for me in those days, marijuana, which was considered a really difficult thing to find, and if you got it, they put you in jail. But I found that drug actually helped calm me down. It was the one thing that took the highs and the lows away and gave me more of a medium to operate. And quite honestly, that's how I think I really saved my life, quite honestly, was doing marijuana. It really helped calm me. But the doctors, what are you doing? You can't take marijuana. This is a horrible thing. I said, no, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And they just were so against it. But I knew it was the only thing that was helping me. And quite honestly, to this day, I really contribute marijuana as helping me get through my bipolar period.
So how long did you suffer with that?
9 years.
And then at what point of those 9 years did you realize that you had healed yourself? And was it just the marijuana? Because I was told you healed yourself with yoga.
Well, eventually yoga certainly became a very integral part of my life. My theater training was yoga. My voice dropped an octave. I had a voice class at National Theater School that was 9 months long. We had 3 hours a week, and I lowered my voice through yoga vocal classes, an octave, just by breathing, learning how to breathe correctly. And then I realized yoga was an important part of my life, but I didn't really start doing it seriously on a regular basis until I turned 52. And then I've been teaching yoga for 17 years and practicing on a regular basis. But up until then, I kind of hit and miss with yoga because I was just so busy doing other things and I wasn't taking it as seriously. But as I got older, I realized how important it was to my own health, basically.
So would you say that you are fully cured now, or do you feel like if you don't do the yoga and take the marijuana that you'll have a relapse?
Number one, I don't see myself as being cured. I don't think there was anything wrong to begin with.
Okay.
That was just my perspective.
Right, stop right there. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm trying to get this clear for me and what I think my viewers would want to know as well. So what was the problem?
I think, and I can honestly say, I only know what I have personally experienced. I don't think you can say that any person who has a bipolar situation, that there's any one remedy for anybody or all of them. I think every individual has to be addressed as an individual. And I think because of the peculiarity of what they call bipolarism, every person has a different need and a different thing that they have to address.
What is your definition of that?
Of what, bipolar itself?
Yes.
Well, you've heard things like they say it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, and so they give you drugs to balance out the chemistry in the brain. That's one theory about it. Myself, how can I say this? I'm a mystic. I saw the mystery of the world before my eyes. I saw the magic of creation. I saw that in some ways, people forget that we only see 4% of what actually exists in the universe. There's 96% of energy we do not see because our instrument is not capable of seeing it. And so when I was in my bipolar experience, I recognized that in some ways, let's say if an alien, and I don't believe in aliens, by the way, I don't believe in anything, but if another source of life was on this planet, they would not see us the way we are. They would see us maybe as a form of wiggly energy. So my point is, things aren't what they seem to be. And a recent awareness for me is, I love this idea. It wouldn't surprise me if one day science proves or shows us that we're probably maybe subatomic particles with very elaborate lifestyles. And when I realize how big we are physically, and you look at the size of the universe, we're so minuscule that it makes life to be an extraordinary event.
Right. So I know a lot of people that are schizophrenic and they suffer with bipolar disorder. What can you leave with those people that has helped you that will hopefully help them?
As Shakespeare said it, and I used this as my mantra growing up, to thine own self be true. I think you can only follow what is in your heart. I really know that you really should only follow your instincts. You should follow your intuition. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what everybody has to own up to. I didn't grow up with fear. That's the other thing I want to point out, that growing up, my father was in counterintelligence. My uncle, they both were lieutenant colonels in counterintelligence. They even worked together in Germany. My great-grandfather was governor of Georgia, and I come from a very peculiar background on my father's side. My mother was a Sephardic Jew. And so I think the combination of the way I have lived my life, I have been given a great gift to study the mystery of being alive. And when I say I'm a mystic, I mean I study the mystery of life. Mm-hmm. And that bipolar episodes, those bipolar episodes that I had, was kind of my introduction to the mystical realm that I think Rumi speaks of, that Joseph Campbell used to point out, Alan Watts, Krishnamurti. I met Krishnamurti some years ago. I started to follow philosophy. I started to follow what these amazing men were talking about. And I started to have this wonder about experience itself. So I learned to read auras. I went to the Berkeley Psychic Institute before it actually became a school with Lou Bostwick in Berkeley. And this was back in the early 70s. And I learned how to read energy, basically. And bipolar episodes were part of that.
So this book, tell us a little bit about this book. You gifted this book to me today.
Yes, I did, yes.
It's mine?
Yes.
Tell us about this book.
Well, to me, my bipolar experiences brought me to this book. I think one of the reasons I'm on this planet is to write this book. My whole life led me to this book. I met a Japanese publisher some years ago. I did an astrology reading for him. He was so impressed. He says, could you write a book about the Mayan prediction and what's going to happen to Japan based on the Mayan prediction and their astrology chart? And I thought, wow, that's a strange, interesting idea. And so we communicated for about 3 months, and I thought, yeah, I think I can do this. And he sent me a contract, and before I knew it, I published my first book in Tokyo, Japan. So again, talk about synchronicity. So for me to have been born in Tokyo, and then to be given a contract to write a book that was published in Japan, that's what I call major synchronicity.
How did you get someone to translate it in Japanese?
His company, of course, translated the book. But then after I wrote the book, I realized I wanted to expand the book and add more about the United States. And I realized I did write about China for Japan because that's important to them. And so I expanded the Chinese and the American relationship in this book. And that's what I did with this book. I expanded it and added China and the United States.
So this is the second edition?
This is the second edition, and I even write about President Trump. I think what's going to happen to him with this presidency. We're going through a cultural revolution right now, and these bipolar experiences I had, in my opinion, they were kind of my training to study the mystery of creation itself, and that's really how I look at my bipolar episodes as a great gift, quite honestly. I don't see it as a detriment, and I certainly don't see it as an illness. For me, it was a way of learning how the mystery of the world exists.
Right. Can you believe what I'm going to tell you? We're down to less than 5 minutes.
Wow, it went that fast.
Wow. So what haven't we covered that's critical that we leave with the viewers? Because my hope is someone watching this show will hear you say something that will trigger a chord in them that will help them if they're struggling with some of what you have described. So what haven't we covered that you really think would help someone?
Yoga, and there's no question about it, that yoga is one of the best things anybody can do. I don't care what your problems are, whether it's back problems, psychological problems, bipolar problems. Yoga is a way of getting you in touch with yourself, your body, and your health. And it's really probably the most important thing I would recommend to anybody who really wants to heal themselves, because yoga teaches you how to breathe with intention and movement. And in a sense, the trinity of yoga is breath, movement with intention. And yoga means yoke, so you become a whole person, a W-H-O-L-E. A wholeality is what I call it. And the reality of life is a mystery. And I'm just can't imagine being anywhere else. Think about it. This moment has never existed in the history of eternity.
Right.
And that's the magic of being alive.
Well, for me, I've never really tried yoga, but I see one of the problems with our world, I think, my opinion, is that people who don't share your views, they have a tendency to judge. And I mean, I was guilty of this too. I'm trying to be more open-minded and to accept people for who they are. So I feel that some of what you've described tonight, because we're down to 2 minutes, is the lesson I'm getting from my life and listening to you is we should be more open, because some of the things we are close to may be the things that will set us free and help us. And so if it's not hurting you, there's no harm in trying it. And so we are about to wrap up because we're down to the end of the show, but you also have a radio show. Can you tell me how people could find you on radio?
I guess my website, mercuryminute .com, mercuryminute.com or michaelmercury.com, and there's information there about when I'm on the radio. And in fact, I'm getting on a second radio station next couple of weeks as well.
Okay, great. And so if somebody wants to buy the book, because you said they can read the book and get more information.
Well, they can find it.
They can send it to they can contact you at the same website.
Yes, exactly.
And last thing before we wrap, what do you want to leave with my viewers?
I'll repeat what Shakespeare said, "To thine own self be true." And I think we're here to be our authentic self, and that's the best way to heal yourself.
I thank you so very much for driving all the way from Sacramento to do this. I thank you so much for watching the Jennylyn Show. And once again, my hope is something that was said here today on this show is going to change and make a difference in your life. And thank you so much for watching the Jennylyn Show. Thank you to my amazing crew. I cannot do this show without these great people. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.